Throughout 2024, Pope Francis faced various health problems that required specialized medical attention. More precisely, on February 14, 2025, the 88-year-old man was admitted to Gemelli Hospital in Rome due to a complex respiratory infection of viral, bacterial, and fungal origin. His advanced age and the evident physical deterioration that the faithful around the world had been able to observe in recent times made the concern not only imminent but grow minute by minute. Prayers for his health were abundant and a tense atmosphere prevailed. In addition, constant reports on his progress were circling the world in a matter of seconds. First, it was said that Francisco was battling the disease and hope filled every corner. However, less than 48 hours later, the Vatican itself confirmed that his condition was critical. All the faithful held their breath and prepared for the worst. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. The lives and actions of those who knew how to occupy the so-called throne of St. Peter are put under the scrutiny of public scrutiny, and each of those who passed through there had their own characteristics. Francis the Argentine Pope, was for many the renewer of faith, but there were those who thought that his past could condemn him, as occurred to some degree to his predecessor, the German Joseph Aloysius Ratzinger, who held the highest ecclesiastical position as Benedict XVI. His controversial stances on pressing current issues placed him at the center of controversy, when society demanded clear stances from its leaders. Beyond traditions, what seems evident is that Francisco was indeed the last and ambiguous representative of an institution that, according to many, is called to change or disappear. Was Francisco a pope up to what the Church needed to establish itself in the 21st century? Was there a stain in his youth that he strove to hide? Trying to answer these and other questions will take us to April 21st, 2025, the day Francisco died. Do you believe that a change is coming in the Church or perhaps in the very concept of religion from now on? If you want more stories related to the popes, you can write Vatican in the comments, but let's better start from the beginning. Jorge Mario Bergoglio was born in the Flores neighborhood of Buenos Aires on December 17, 1936. He was the firstborn of a marriage like the many other families forming in the country then. His father, Mario José Bergoglio, was born in Asti, Italy in 1908. As fascism advanced across Europe, the man decided to cross the ocean and build his future in Argentina. He worked as a railway employee, and in his new home he would meet Regina Maria Sibori, also the daughter of Italian immigrants. Along with Jorge, Mario and Regina, the couple had 4 more children, all raised as Catholics. Jorge was baptized on Christmas of 1936 at the Basilica of Maria Auxiliadora and San Carlos in the Almagro neighborhood of Buenos Aires. His early school years were under the guidance of the Salesian order at the Wilfrid Baron of the Holy Angels School. But his secondary studies were at an industrial school, from which he graduated with a degree in chemical technician. The religious vocation was not yet central, but those who knew him knew that a large part of his inner life revolved around a vigorous faith. In addition to receiving his brand new title, it allowed him to get a job at the Hickety-Bachmann laboratory where he did bromatological analysis. But the restless young man did not want to stay there forever before he could set his eye on his next step. In 1956, an acute lung infection, probably severe pneumonia with lung abscess, put his life at risk. A risky operation managed to save him at the cost of removing the upper part of his right lung. Although the surgery was extremely complex for the time, the prognosis was excellent. Everyone agreed that he should not have any breathing problems resulting from the surgery, nor would he have any decrease in his respiratory capacity. He only needed to worry in the unlikely event that he encountered a disease that would again compromise both lungs, something like bilateral pneumonia. Just months later, in 1957, Jorge Bergoglio entered the seminary in the Villa Devoto neighborhood and the novitiate of the Society of Jesus. He was 21 years old. He knew he had been saved thanks to the work of the doctors. But he also clearly understood that the whole experience had shown him the fragility of life. He had abruptly decided that he had no time to waste. The uncorrupted one lasted 2 years, after which Jorge traveled to Chile to finish his juniorate at the San Alberto Hurtado retreat house. There he studied Latin, Greek literature and history to become a teacher himself. From 1964 to 1966, he taught psychology and literature at the College of the Immaculate in Santa Fe. In that same chair, he would meet Jorge Luis Borges, who gave a seminar on literature moderated by Bergoglio. However, even though he felt honored by the presence and stature of the LEF writer, his political ideals were at the antipodes. And that's how the organization called Iron Guard came about. In 1966, General Juan Carlos Zonganua led a military coup, overthrowing the constitutional president Arturo Illia and establishing a self-proclaimed dictatorship called the Argentine Revolution. The de facto government's early action was university intervention. This would culminate in one of the sadly infamous chapters of Argentina's recent history, the so-called Night of the Long Batons. The 29th of July, 1966. It was when the federal police broke into the University of Buenos Aires and violently repressed the students and teachers who were protesting against the intervention. Thus arose the Iron Guard, a Peronist organization that had been operating in the shadows since the military coup of 1955, which overthrew President Juan Domingo Perón. The Iron Guard had a marked Catholic and nationalist inspiration, with a vertical structure similar to a militia and with a wide silent participation in unions and universities. In 1966, Jorge Bergoglio had influence within the University of Salvador, an institution linked to the Society of Jesus. Along with other Jesuits, he played the role of spiritual director of young Catholics who were joining the Iron Guard. Although the group had a fundamentally political objective, it has been associated several times with other revolutionary cells that advocated for armed struggle, something that history has strived to deny. But he continued his studies and career. From 1967 to 1970, Jorge studied theology at the Faculty of Theology of the Maximum College of San Jose. Finally, he received the priestly orders on December 13, 1969. He was 33 years old. It would be 6 years of studies and advancements in his career until the sinister period arrived, which years later would put him in a compromising position when he already held the highest authority in Rome. On March 24, 1976, a new coup d'etat overthrew the then-president Maria Estela Martínez de Perón. This time, the military advance was named the National Reorganization Process. Jorge Rafael Videla assumed the position of de facto president and led the military junta, along with Admiral Emilio Eduardo Macera from the Navy and Brigadier General Orlando Ramón Agosti from the Air Force. The process of national reorganization is known as one of the most sinister and confusing stages in Argentine history. In the period that spanned from 1976 to the end of 1983, democracy was suspended and constitutional rights disappeared. So perhaps we may never know for certain how many victims there were and what abuses were committed. In that context, several priests disappeared, victims of torture and official cover-up. The future pope, then head of the Jesuits in the province, acted swiftly in response to the disappearance and torture of the Jesuits. Orlando Iorio and Francisco Jalix both were kidnapped on May 23rd in the villa of Bajo Flores, where they were doing pastoral work. They were detained and tortured for 5 months in the Escuela de Mecánica de la Armada, the Navy Mechanics School, until their release. In October of 1976, Bergoglio met with Rafael Videla and Macera advocating for their release. And it is at this point that years later, during the review of the crimes against humanity committed during the national reorganization process, and the performance of the public figures of the time, the name of Bergoglio resurfaced. Critics noted that Bergoglio had made statements about Llorio and Jalix's circumstances, more like a bureaucratic procedure and to keep up appearances, but that in reality he would not have made his best effort to achieve the freedom of the two kidnapped Jesuits. However, although it was not known until much later, Bergoglio had organized a clandestine network for those persecuted by the dictatorship to flee to Brazil. Writers, religious people, and intellectuals turned to this organization to be able to leave the territory where they had a certain death sentence. Between 2007 and 2011, he testified twice as a witness in the trials of the Escuela de Mecánica de la Armada mega case. By that time, his reputation was already on the rise, and everyone predicted a great future for him. Bergoglio was consecrated titular Bishop of Oca on May 20, 1992, and coadjutor Archbishop of Buenos Aires in 1997. As Archbishop, he also became Primate of Argentina and Grand Chancellor of the Catholic University of Argentina. In 2001, Pope John Paul II appointed him Cardinal. He joined various Vatican bodies and was President of the Argentine Episcopal Conference between 2005 and 2011. During his tenure, he promoted the beatification of the Palatine Fathers murdered in 1976. Despite his commitment to pious causes, he had confrontations with the democratic governments of Nestor and Cristina Kirchner, as he did not approve of the push for same-sex marriage, proposing for his part civil union, where the sacraments would not be at stake. Upon turning 75 years old, he submitted his resignation to the archbishopric, planning to retire to a priestly home, but the plans were different. In the 2005 conclave, after the death of John Paul II, Cardinal Bergoglio was considered papabile and would have obtained about 40 votes, falling behind Joseph Ratzinger, who was elected and took the name of Benedict XVI. It is speculated that Bergoglio asked the cardinals not to vote for him, but due to the absolute secrecy of the conclave, this is information that cannot be confirmed. In 2013, after Benedict XVI resigned, a new conclave was held, with Bergoglio seen as a reformist candidate, although he was not one of the favorites on March 13, 2013. In the fifth vote, Bergoglio was elected Pope under the name of Francis, becoming the first Jesuit American pontiff and from the Southern Hemisphere. Soon his attitudes would be reviewed in detail and every step compared with his predecessors. His closeness to the Peronist lineage governments in Argentina was always criticized, but his traditionalist convictions also remained firm. However, the reality he had to face demanded more concrete answers, such as defining the stance on abuse cases involving priests. In 2018, he first defended Chilean Bishop Juan Barros, accused of cover-up, but later apologized and accepted his resignation. Then, convinced that the church had to rise to the urgency of a situation as terrible as it was controversial, he abolished the pontifical secret in abuse cases and created the Commission for the Protection of Minors. The latter, however, has always been in doubt due to its questionable effectiveness. What if it was about current affairs? The lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer community was also among those realities, from which a clear stance was expected from Francisco. But the man always managed to avoid a definitive statement. The tension with public opinion has wanted to be alleviated with phrases like, "Who am I to judge?" He only said this occasionally, referring to the topic. Francisco has come to support legislation that protects same-sex couples, but at the same time, he has stood firm in the traditionalist doctrine of the Church, which considers homosexual relationships as a sin. In turn, during his papacy, he has criticized gender ideology and has opposed the blessing of homosexual unions within the Church. This is due to his adherence to Catholic doctrine, although he has promoted a more inclusive pastoral approach. In short, critics say he did less than what was demanded, but more than other pontiffs. To better understand, in the Apostolic Exhortation Amoris Laetitia of 2016, Francis opened the possibility for divorced and remarried people to receive communion, which was criticized by conservative cardinals. The new pope seemed cornered by opinions. He has also strived to soften the Church's stance on abortion, birth control, and other sensitive issues, generating resistance in some ecclesiastical groups. In 2018, the Vatican signed an agreement with China on appointing bishops, something that was scandalous for much of the Curia, considering that this agreement implied a concession to the Communist Party, especially for not condemning the persecution of Christians in that country as expected. But of course, there were other controversies. Many, to be honest. Nothing has been black or white in the pontificate of Francis this. On the contrary, the balance results in a disturbing gray, as he has attended to certain historical claims made to the Vatican, such as the management of finances. Francis committed to order the accounts and face internal corruption, but even this caused controversies. In 2021, the trial of Cardinal Angelo Vecchio for alleged embezzlement of funds showed divisions within the Roman Curia. Apparently, the tumultuous times and their paradigm shifts put the Pope in a bind every time he made a decision. But not confronting the events of the most current affairs was not a better option. And proof of this was his refusal to directly condemn Russia and its president Vladimir Putin for the invasion of Ukrainian territory. His assertion that NATO could have provoked Russia sparked controversy in the context of the conflict. Francisco was a controversial figure both within and beyond the Church, with supporters who saw his papacy as an attempt at modernization and critics who accused him of weakening traditional doctrine. For instance, He restricted Latin Mass celebrations, causing great unrest among conservatives. He has also clashed with cardinals and bishops who have questioned his leadership, like the Archbishop Carlo Maria Vigano, who even accused him of covering up abuses and who ended up being excommunicated. So many battles fought on so many fronts could exhaust men much younger than Francis. Despite trying to stay in his duties until the last moment, his strength began to wane and he had to continue with his tasks in a wheelchair. It seemed that nothing could take him away from his flock, but at 88 years old, his strength left him. And that's how our story comes full circle. Francisco I was diagnosed with bilateral pneumonia, precisely the only disease he had to fear since his youth. The diagnosis was extended on February 18th. Medical reports indicated that, in addition to pneumonia, the pontiff had asthmatic bronchitis. He was administered antibiotics and corticosteroids as part of the treatment, which managed to stabilize the condition, but no notable improvement was observed. On February 22nd, the Pope's health declined due to a severe asthmatic respiratory crisis necessitating high-flow oxygen therapy. In addition, blood tests revealed thrombocytopenia and anemia, which necessitated the administration of blood transfusions. By then, it was already public knowledge that the Pope had left a resignation letter, foreseeing that the illness would prevent him from continuing with his duties, something that would eventually happen. Francis I had to face the tumultuous changes of the millennium and was faced with the challenge of pleasing both his own and others, in an era where changes and transformations do not seem to be kind or progressive. For many, he was a worthy representative of the Church and opened a path of hope for those who still seek the shelter of the Word of God. For others, he was a reformer who failed to maintain the equanimity that should characterize the Christian faith. The truth is that one way or another, neither the Church nor the world will ever be the same after his time on this earth. Thank you.